Air India Flight 182 was an Air India flight operating on the Montreal-London-Delhi route. On June 23, 1985, this Boeing 747-237 was destroyed by a bomb at an altitude of 31,000 feet. It crashed into the Atlantic Ocean while in Irish airspace. It was the first bombing of a 747 jumbo jet. A total of 329 people were killed, including 268 Canadian citizens, 27 Britons, and 24 Indians. The majority of the victims were Canadian citizens of Indian ancestry. The incident was the largest mass murder in Canadian history. The bombing of Air India 182 occurred at the same time as the Narita Airport bombing. Investigators believe that the two plots were linked, and that the group responsible was aiming for a double bombing. However, the bomb at Narita exploded before it could be loaded onto the plane. Canadian law enforcement determined that the main suspects in the bombing were members of the Sikh militant group Babar Khalsa. The attack is thought to have been a retaliation against India for the operation carried out by the Indian Army Operation Blue Star to flush out several hundred Sikh who were within the premises of the Golden Temple and the surrounding structures ordered by the Indian government, headed by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Though a handful of members were arrested and tried, Inderjit Singh Reiatsu, a Canadian national, remains the only person legally convicted of involvement in the bombing. Singh pleaded guilty in 2003 to manslaughter. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for building the bombs that exploded aboard Flight 182 and at Narita. The subsequent investigation and prosecution lasted almost 20 years and was the most expensive trial in Canadian history, costing nearly $130 million. The Governor-General and Council in 2006 appointed the former Supreme Court Justice John Major to conduct a commission of inquiry. His report was completed and released on June 17, 2010. It concluded that a cascading series of errors by the Government of Canada, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the Canadian Security Intelligence Service had allowed the terrorist attack to take place. Background and motivation: most official accounts place responsibility for the attack on Sikh extremism. Tensions between Muslims and Hindus and other groups date to before the partition of British India in 1947. The Sikh communities suffered much death, violence and hardship following the partition, as did other religious groups. The partition created Pakistan and India. The state of Punjab was divided between India and Pakistan. Later, the Khalistan movement arose to create another Sikh homeland in the Punjab region of India and Pakistan. It referred to the 19th-century Sikh Empire. Canada's RCMP Security Service had followed members of the Khalistan movement in Canada since 1974, but did not consider it to be a threat until 1981. Sikh immigration to Canada had begun before the early 1900s. Early immigrants often suffered discrimination in British Columbia. During the 1970s, during and following the widespread deaths and social disruption due to the Bangladesh Liberation War of 1971, many new Sikh refugees emigrated to Canada. These included men who became the leaders and members of the Babar Khalsa, such as Talwinder Singh Palmer, Ajab Singh Bagri, Raipudaman Singh Malik and Inderjit Singh Reiatsu. By the 1980s, the area around Vancouver, British Columbia had become the largest centre of Sikh population outside India. They carried with them rivalries and sectarian tensions from India and Pakistan. The Babar Khalsa in its current form developed from the violent clash between the rival Nirankari and Orghan Kirtani Jatha sects on the festival of Vaisakhi in India on April 13, 1978, where 13 Sikhs were killed. The founders of this panthik group vowed to avenge the deaths of Sikhs. Talwinder Singh Palmer led the militant wing of AKJ, which became the Babar Khalsa, to punish the Nirankaris. They had been cleared by the Punjab government of wrongdoing. On April 24, 1980, Gurbakhsh Singh, the Baba of the Nirankaris, was killed. Babar Khalsa claimed responsibility for the assassination. On November 19, 1981, Palmer was among the militants who escaped from a shootout in which 2 Punjab police officers were gunned down outside the house of Amarjit Singh Nihang in Ludhiana district. This added to the notoriety of Babar Khalsa and its leader. He went to Canada. In 1982, India issued a warrant for Palmer's arrest for 6 charges of murder stemming from the killing of the police officers. India notified Canada that Palmer was a wanted terrorist in 1981 and asked for his extradition in 1982. Canada denied the request in July 1982. After an Interpol alert, Palmer was arrested while attempting to enter Germany. Germany chose to handle the case locally rather than hand him over to India. Palmer went on a hunger strike to win his religious right to wear a turban and have vegetarian meals in the Darwan quarter Soldorf jail. After India received information that Palmer had made assassination threats against Indira Gandhi, they found that Germany had decided that the evidence was weak. They had expelled Palmer and released him to Canada on June 1984 after nearly a year in jail. On June 6, 1984, the Khalistan movement was sparked into action as Prime Minister of India Indira Gandhi ordered Operation Blue Star, the storming of the Golden Temple. Militants led by Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale had amassed weapons in the Sikh temple. The militants demanded that Sikhs not be treated as second-class citizens in India and demanded equality through changes in the Indian constitution or otherwise the creation of a Sikh state, Khalistan. Some independent estimates of the death toll of the operation ran as high as 1,500 civilian deaths, which led to an uproar amongst Sikhs worldwide. On October 31, 1984, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by 2 of her Sikh bodyguards. In retaliation, 1984 anti-Sikh riots, guided by certain Indian National Congress members, killed thousands of Sikhs in India. Shortly after Blue Star, Palmer visited the auto mechanic and electrician Inderjit Singh Reiat, who lived in Duncan, British Columbia, a small community north of Victoria on Vancouver Island. He asked him to construct a bomb. Reiat later claimed he had no idea what it would be used for. Reiat asked various people in the community about dynamite, saying he wanted to remove tree stumps on his property. Reiat also discussed explosives with a co-worker, while expressing anger at the Indian government and Indira Gandhi in particular. Later that year, Ajay Singh Bagri accompanied Palmer as his right-hand man in the armed struggle against the Indian government. Bagri worked as a forklift driver at a sawmill near the town of Kamloops. He was known as a powerful preacher in the Indo-Canadian community. The pair travelled across Canada to rally Sikhs to the cause of avenging the attack on the Golden Temple. They used the meetings as fundraisers for Baba Khalsa. A former head priest in Hamilton testified that Bagri said, "The Indian government is our enemy, the same way the Hindu society is our enemy." Bagri told a congregation, "Get your weapons ready so we can take revenge against the Indian government." Bagri called for action. "We are slaves in Punjab. Our brothers and sisters are being killed and so we have to stand up for ourselves. Nobody's going to help us. So to make our own state we need an army, we need ammunition, we need rifles to fight with the Indian government to make our own state, Khalistan." Bagri's speech, on July 28, 1984, the founding convention of the World Sikh Organization was held at Madison Square Garden in New York City. The WSO's constitution was committed to diplomacy and non-violence, and it said the organization would strive for an independent Sikh homeland by peaceful means. Though Palmer was blocked at the border, Bagri gave an hour-long speech at the convention. He said, "Until we kill 50,000 Hindus, we will not rest," before an enraged crowd of 4,000 people. This statement was quoted against him at his later trial. Bagri defended hijackers who had forced the hated Indian government into negotiations with the Sikh leadership, and was critical of Gandhian non-violence. "We are to die in the battlefield, fighting, by sacrificing ourselves. To die such a death, which is the mission of the Khalsa, is our religion." Militant Islamic Kashmiri and Afghan rebels also were invited to the rally. An Afghan Mujahideen agreed, "We will bring together all movements against India because India allies itself with the Soviet Union." A professional translator testified that Bagri's speech in Punjabi had been distorted by failing to understand its context within Sikh history and literature. He denied that Bagri had urged Sikhs to take revenge against all Hindus. He conceded that Bagri was trying to inflame passions and arouse national pride. Plot preparations. In late 1984, at least 2 informers reported to authorities on the first abortive plot to bomb Air India Flight 182, which flew out of Montreal's Mirabel International Airport at that time. In August 1984, the known criminal Jerry Bauer-Dewalt claimed that Tawanda Palmer showed him a suitcase stuffed with $200,000, payment to plant a bomb. He decided, "I had done some bad things in my time, done my time in jail, but putting a bomb on a plane not me. I went to the police." In September, in an attempt to get his sentence for theft and fraud reduced, Harmel Singh Grewal of Vancouver told the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police of the plot to bomb the flight from Montreal. Both reports were dismissed as unreliable. The moderate Sikh Ujjal Dosanjh had spoken out against violence by Sikh extremists. In retaliation, he was attacked on February 1985 by an assailant wielding an iron bar. His skull was broken and he required 80 stitches in his head. On March 5, 1985, Canada's CSIS Domestic Intelligence Agency obtained a court order to place Palmer under surveillance for 1 year, just 3 months before the bombing. Although the Babar Khalsa had not yet been officially banned, the affidavit stated, "It is a Sikh terrorist group now established in Canada, has claimed responsibility for more than 40 assassinations of moderate Sikhs and other persons in the Punjab, and penned its name to threatening letters, addressed to high officials in India." The affidavit said that on July 15, 1984, Palmer urged the Coach Temple congregation of Calgary, Alberta, to unite, fight and kill to avenge the attack on the Golden Temple. Explosives and clocks. In April 1985, a Canadian familiar with blasting was asked by Reiatsu how much dynamite it would take to blow up a tree stump. Another friend who listened in recalled that Reiatsu was very agitated about getting even for the sacrilege at Amritsar. He was almost talking like Hitler. Reiatsu was not shy about telling everyone he knew around Duncan about the need for revenge, or asking about explosives. Reiatsu sought cases of dynamite and did not care if he had to pay 3 times the normal price. He eventually confided it was not about stumps, but trouble in the old country, that he needed explosives to help my countrymen. One friend declined to get him dynamite, but did lend him a 400-page manual on mining with explosives. On May 8, 1985, Reiatsu bought a micro-digital automobile clock at the Radio Shack store in Duncan. Designed for a 12-volt automobile electrical system, it could also be powered by a 12-volt lantern battery. The 24-hour alarm activated a buzzer, but he returned a week later for an electrical relay after asking how to get the buzzer signal to power another device. Wiretappers recorded 9 telephone calls between Palmer's residence in Vancouver and Reiatsu from either his residence or workplace on Vancouver Island that month, which got Reiatsu added to the list of persons being monitored for terrorist activities. The Canadian government would later accuse Reiatsu of lying in 2003 when at first he said he did not know what 3 clocks he had bought could be used for. He later said Palmer needed an explosive device to blow up a bridge or something large in India, and that he needed timers for an explosive device. In that case, the relay could be used to trigger the detonator circuit for a blasting cap which would provide the initial shock needed to detonate larger explosives such as dynamite. Reiatsu later visited a television repair shop with a partially disassembled car clock wired to a lantern battery. He needed help so that the buzzer stayed on rather than intermittently beeping, so that it would turn on a light in his camper to wake him up. The repairman knew his friend did not own a camper, and it would even strike Justice J. Raymond Paris at Reiatsu's 1991 trial as an odd use for a timer. Bomb tests. By mid-May, Reiatsu had gone into the woods to test a device with a 12-volt battery, cardboard cylinder, gunpowder, and some dynamite, but the device failed to work. Later, Reiatsu acquired between 6 and 8 sticks of dynamite to blow up unidentified stumps if need be in the future from a Duncan well driller after visiting his house to fix a truck. He also obtained a few blasting caps days later. On May 31, 1985, Reiatsu brought his timer, attached to a boombox, into his shop so that his fellow employee at Duncan Auto Marine Electric could help him fix it for a friend, but he returned the radio after it did not work properly. On June 4, CSIS agents Larry Lowe and Lynn McAdams followed Palmer and a youthful man as they went from Palmer's house to the Horseshoe Bay Ferry Terminal, rode the Nanaimo-bound ferry, and visited Reiatsu at his home and shop at Auto Marine Electric. The three drove to a deserted bush area, where Reiatsu was observed taking an object into the woods. Staying out of sight, the agents, who did not bring a camera, only heard an explosion which sounded like a loud gunshot. Later tests showed it could also have been an explosion, and later searches turned up remnants of an aluminium electrical blasting cap. J.S. Warren, Director General of Counterterrorism at CSIS, would later ask on July 16, 1986 why they did not ask the police to stop and question the suspects, or search the vehicle, which might have deterred the bombing plot. The next day, Reiatsu purchased a large Sanyo component tuner, model FMT 611AK, at Woolworths, and left his name and telephone number on the charge slip, which was later found in a search of his home. Reiatsu also bought smokeless gunpowder from a sporting goods store, signing I Reiatsu on the explosives log. Study of debris from the Narita explosion would eventually show the bomb had been housed inside a Sanyo tuner with a serial number matching a model sold only in British Columbia, and used a micron to clock as a timer which powered a relay with an ever-ready 12-volt battery to trigger blasting caps to set off a high explosive consistent with sticks of dynamite, all matching items purchased by Reiatsu. This would lead to his eventual conviction. As late as 2010, Reiatsu admitted only to buying and assembling some parts, but denied he ever made a bomb, knew what the bomb was to be used for, who was behind any plot, or that he ever asked or knew the name of the man who he said stayed in his house for a week completing construction of the explosive device after his device failed. On June 9, 1985, a police informer in Hamilton reported that Palmer and Bagri had visited the Molten Sikh temple, warning the faithful that it would be unsafe to fly Air India. Vancouver police also monitored militants 11 days before the bombing. A leader of the International Sikh Youth Federation complained that no Indian consuls or ambassadors had yet been killed, but the response was, "You will see something will be done in 2 weeks." Tickets: the suspects in the bombing used pay phones and talked in code. Translators' notes of wiretapped conversations include the following exchange between Talwinder Palmer and a follower named Hardeal Singh Jewel on June 20, 1985, the day the tickets were purchased. Palmer: did you write the story? Jewel: no, I didn't. Palmer: do that work first. This conversation appears to be an order from Palmer to book the airline tickets. It is believed that writing the story referred to purchasing the tickets. Afterward, Jewel phoned Palmer back and asked if he could come over and read the story he asked for, to which Palmer agreed. Moments after the wiretapped conversation, at 1 Greenwich Mean Time, a man calling himself Mr. Singh made reservations for 2 flights on June 22, one for Jaswant Singh to fly from Vancouver to Toronto on Canadian Pacific Airlines Flight 086 and one for Mohinder Singh to fly from Vancouver to Tokyo on Canadian Pacific Airlines Flight 003 and connect to Air India Flight 301 to Bangkok. At 2:20 Greenwich Mean Time on the same day, another call changed the reservation in the name of Jaswant Singh from CP086 to CP060, also flying from Vancouver to Toronto. The caller further requested to be put on the waiting list for AI-181 from Toronto to Montreal and AI-182 from Montreal to Bombay. The next day, at 19:10 Greenwich Mean Time, a man wearing a turban paid for the 2 tickets with $3,005 in cash at a CP ticket office in Vancouver. The names on the reservations were changed, Jaswant Singh became M. Singh, and Mohinder Singh became L. Singh. The reservation and purchase of these tickets together would be used as evidence to link the 2 flights to one plot, despite some claims that it was only a coincidence. One telephone number left as a contact was Vancouver's Ross Street Sikh Temple. The other number became one of the first leads tracked by investigators, and was traced to Hardeal Singh Jewel, a janitor at a Vancouver high school. Jewel was an avid follower of Talwinder Singh Palmer, and thus closely scrutinized in the investigation following the Air India bombing. He was alleged to have stored the suitcase explosives in the basement of a Vancouver school and to have purchased the tickets for the flights on which the bombs were placed. Mandip Singh Gruel recounted how he saw and recognized Jewel as his school's janitor when he said goodbye to his father, one of the Flight 182 victims, at the airport on the day of the bombing. Reiatsu went to work on June 21. Phone records show he called Jewel at 7:17 p.m. A witness whose name was protected testified that Bagri asked to borrow her car the night before the bombing to take some suitcases to the airport, though he himself would not be flying with them. Bombings. On June 22, 1985, at 13:30 Greenwich Mean Time, a man calling himself Manjit Singh called to confirm his reservations on Air India Flight 181/182. He was told he was still waitlisted, and was offered alternative arrangements, which he declined. At 15:50 Greenwich Mean Time, M. Singh checked into a busy line of 30 people for the CP flight from Vancouver to Toronto, which was scheduled to leave at 9:18 a.m. He asked Agent Jeannie Adams to check his dark brown, hard-sided Samsonite suitcase, and have it transferred to Air India Flight 181 and then to Flight 182 to India. The agent initially refused his request to interline the baggage since his seat from Toronto to Montreal and from Montreal to Bombay was unconfirmed. He insisted, but the agent again rebuffed him, telling him, "Your ticket doesn't read that you're confirmed, and we're not supposed to check your baggage through." The man said, "Wait, I'll get my brother for you." As he started to walk away, she relented and agreed to accept the bag, but told him he would have to check in again with Air India in Toronto. After the crash, Adams would realize this deception got the bag on its way to Flight 182. The anxious man was never identified. At 16:16 Greenwich Mean Time, Canadian Pacific Airlines Flight 60 to Toronto Pearson International Airport departed without Singh. Reiatsu would later testify that he traveled by ferry from Duncan to Vancouver that morning to work on his brother's truck. Phone records show someone called from his residence in Duncan to Jewel's number at 10:50 a.m. and 4:00 p.m. later that day. Reiatsu was seen in the company of another East Indian man at the Auto Marine Electric store in Burnaby, near Palmer's house, between 10:00 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. He bought two 12-volt batteries similar to the one used in the explosive device tested in the woods, and they were to fit into a special metal bracket he had brought with him. Constable Clark Marlowe later believed there was ample time for Inderjit Singh Reiatsu to obtain the batteries at the Auto Marine Electric Limited store in Burnaby, incorporate the batteries in the assembly of an explosive device and then have the device transported in a suitcase to the Vancouver airport. Sometime before 2022 Greenwich Mean Time, L. Singh checked in for the 137 CP Air Flight 003 to Tokyo with one piece of luggage, which was to be transferred to Air India Flight 301 to Bangkok. However, L. Singh did not board the flight. At 2022 Greenwich Mean Time, Canadian Pacific Airlines Flight 60 arrived in Toronto 12 minutes late. Some of the passengers and baggage, including the bag Singh had checked in, were transferred to Air India Flight 182. In response to threats from Sikh activists, Air India had requested extra security, leading Canada to assign extra policemen in terminals in Toronto and Montreal, and all baggage was to be checked by X-ray or by hand. But after the X-ray machine broke down that day, inspectors used a portable PDD-4 explosive sniffer. An Air India security officer had demonstrated that it made a loud scream when a liter match was held an inch away, and showed that it should be used around the edge of the bag being tested. Between 5:15 and 6:00, the sniffer was heard to beep at a soft-sided maroon suitcase with a zipper going all around. It beeped in a low volume near the zipper lock. But Air India was not informed since checkers were not instructed on how to react to only a short beep, and they allowed the bag pass on its way. Later investigation would determine that the two containers that could have contained M. Singh's bag were placed close to the sensitive electronic bay of the aircraft. At 0:15 Greenwich Mean Time on June 23, Air India Flight 181, a Boeing 747-237B named Emperor Kanishka, departed Toronto Pearson International Airport for Montreal copyright Al Mirabel International Airport. The aircraft was an hour and 40 minutes late because a fifth pod was installed under the aircraft below the left wing to be flown to India for repairs. Some of the parts had to be stored in the rear cargo compartment. The plane arrived in Montreal copyright Al Mirabel International Airport at 1 Greenwich Mean Time. There, it became Flight 182. Flight 182 departed for London Heathrow Airport, en route to Palam International Airport, Delhi, and Zahar International Airport, Bombay. 329 people were on board, 307 passengers and 22 crew. Captain Hans Singh Narendra served as the commander, with Captain Satwinder Singh Binder as the first officer and Dara Dumazia as the flight engineer. Many of the passengers were going to visit families and friends. At 7:14 and 1 second Greenwich Mean Time, the crew of the Boeing 747 Squawk 2005 as requested by Shannon International Airport Air Traffic Control, then disappeared. A bomb in a Sanyo tuna in a suitcase in the Ford cargo hold had exploded while the plane was at 31,000 feet at 51 degree 3.6 euro squared N 12 degree 49 euro squared W. It caused rapid decompression and the breakup of the aircraft in mid-air. The wreckage settled in 6,700 feet deep water off the southwest Irish coast, 120 miles offshore of County Cork. No Mayday call was received by Shannon ATC. ATC asked aircraft in the area to try to contact Air India, to no avail. By 7:30 Greenwich Mean Time, ATC had declared an emergency and requested nearby cargo ships and the Irish Naval Service vessel La Permelaisling to look out for the aircraft. The second bag, checked in by L. Singh, went on Canadian Pacific Airlines Flight 003 from Vancouver to Tokyo. There were no X-ray inspections of luggage on this flight. Its target was Air India Flight 301, due to leave with 177 passengers and crew bound for Bangkok Don Muang, but 55 minutes before the Flight 182 bombing, it exploded at the terminal in Narita Airport. 2 Japanese baggage handlers were killed and 4 other people were injured. Recovery of wreckage and bodies. By 9:13 Greenwich Mean Time, the cargo ship Laurentian Forest discovered wreckage of the aircraft and many bodies floating in the water. India's Civil Aviation Minister announced the possibility that the plane had been destroyed by a bomb, and the cause was probably some sort of explosion. Previous 747s had been damaged or destroyed on the ground, but this was the first jumbo jet downed by sabotage. The bomb killed all 22 crew and 307 passengers. 132 bodies were recovered. 197 were lost at sea. 8 bodies exhibited flail pattern injuries, indicating that they had exited the aircraft before it hit the water. This was a sign that the aircraft had broken up in mid-air. 26 bodies showed signs of hypoxia. 25, mostly victims who were seated near windows, showed signs of explosive decompression. 23 had signs of injuries from a vertical force. 21 passengers were found with little or no clothing. One official quoted in the report stated, "All victims have been stated in the PM reports to have died of multiple injuries. 2 of the dead, 1 infant and 1 child, are reported to have died of asphyxia. There is no doubt about the asphyxial death of the infant. In the case of the other child there was some doubt because the findings could also be caused due to the child undergoing tumbling or spinning with the anchor point at the ankles. 3 other victims undoubtedly died of drowning." Additional evidence to support a bombing was retrieved from the broken-up aircraft which lay on the seabed at a depth of 6,700 feet. The British vessel Girdline Locator, equipped with sophisticated sonar, and the French cable-laying vessel La Copyright Onthe Copyright Venin, with its robot submarine Scarab, were dispatched to locate the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder boxes. The boxes would be difficult to find and it was imperative that the search commence quickly. By July 4, the Girdline Locator detected signals on the seabed. On July 9, Scarab pinpointed the CVR and raised it to the surface. The next day, the FDR was also located and recovered. Victims: The casualty list is provided by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Most of the victims resided in southern Ontario and were Hindus. Some of the victims were Sikhs. 105 passengers boarded the flight at Narita Airport while 202 passengers who travelled on Flight 182 had boarded Flight 181 at Toronto Pearson Airport. Interlining passengers boarding Flight 181 in Toronto who became passengers on Flight 182 included 10 passengers connecting from Vancouver, 5 passengers from Winnipeg, 4 passengers from Edmonton, and 2 passengers from Saskatoon. All of these passengers had taken flights on Air Canada. No interlining passengers boarded Flight 182 in Montreal. The flight crew and cabin crew of Flight 182 had boarded in Toronto and commanded the segment of Flight 181 from Toronto to Montreal. There were 68 persons who cleared customs in Toronto and were scheduled to reboard Flight 181 so they could travel to their final destination, Montreal. There was a practice of passengers who would normally fly to and from Toronto buying tickets to and from Montreal due to them having a lower cost than tickets to and from Montreal. On the flights going to Canada, the passengers simply disembarked in Toronto and chose not to reboard the flight to Montreal. 3 passengers scheduled to go onwards to Montreal never reboarded Flight 181, and therefore there were 65 passengers destined for Montreal who flew the Toronto to Montreal segment. Investigations. Within hours, Canada's Indian community was a focus of attention as victims and among hints that officials were investigating connections to the Sikh separatists who had threatened and committed acts of violence in retaliation against Hindus. In the subsequent worldwide investigations over 6 years, many threads of the plot were uncovered. Based on recovery of wreckage and bodies from the surface, it was decided to retrieve wreckage and recorders from the bottom of the sea. That voice and flight recorders were cut out at the same time, and damage to parts recovered from the Ford cargo bay consistent with a blast established that it was probably a bomb near the Ford cargo hold that brought the plane down suddenly. The flight was also soon linked to the earlier bombing in Japan which had also originated from Vancouver. Tickets for both flights had been purchased by the same person, and in both cases the planes were carrying bags without the passenger who checked them in. No bomb parts were recovered from the ocean, but investigations of the blast at Tokyo established that the bomb had been placed in a Sanyo stereo tuner of a series that had been shipped to Vancouver in Canada. The RCMP assigned no less than 135 officers to check every store that could have sold Sanyo tuners, leading to the discovery of a recent sale to mechanic Untitled Chapter in his hometown of Duncan, British Columbia. RCMP contacted the Csis intelligence agency and found they were already investigating the Sikh activists and found out they had already had wiretaps and had observed Reiatsu and Palmer at the test blast near Duncan, and the recovery of blasting cap shunts and a paper bundle wrapper from a blasting cap. A search recovered the receipt for a Sanyo tuner model FMT611K with invoice with his name and phone number, along with sales of other bomb components. It was not until January 1986 that Canadian investigators at the Canadian Aviation Safety Board concluded that a bomb explosion in the Ford cargo hold had downed the airliner. On February 26, 1986, Supreme Court Judge Kerbal of India presented an inquiry report based on investigation conducted by H.S. Kohler. The report also concluded that a bomb originating in Canada brought down the Air India flight. Based on observations, wiretaps, searches and arrests of persons believed to be participants, the bombing was determined to be the joint project of at least 2 Sikh terrorist groups with extensive membership in Canada, the United States, England and India. Their anger had been sparked by the June 1984 assault on the Golden Temple by the Government of India. Suspects. The main suspects in the bombing were members of a Sikh separatist group called the Babar Khalsa and other related groups who were at the time agitating for a separate Sikh state called Khalistan in Punjab, India. Talwinder Singh Palmer, a Canadian citizen born in Punjab and living in British Columbia, was a high-ranking official in the Babar Khalsa. His phone was being tapped by CSIS for 3 months before the bombing. He was killed by the Punjab police in 1992 while in custody. Inderjit Singh Riat worked as an auto mechanic and electrician in Duncan, British Columbia on Vancouver Island. Investigation of the bombing in Tokyo led to discovery that he had bought a Sanyo radio, clocks and other parts found after the blast. He was convicted of manslaughter for constructing the bomb. As part of a deal, he was to testify against others, but as he declined to implicate others, he would be the only suspect convicted in the case. Raipudaman Singh Malik was a Vancouver businessman who helped fund a credit union and several Khalsa schools. He was acquitted of any involvement in the bombings. Ajay Singh Bagri was a mill worker living in Kamloops. He said in a 1984 speech, after Hindu mobs had murdered 3,000 Sikhs in Delhi and other places in retaliation for the assassination of the Prime Minister of India by her Sikh bodyguards, that until we kill 50,000 Hindus, we will not rest. He and Malik were acquitted in 2005. Sajjan Singh Gill was living in Vancouver as the self-proclaimed Consul General of Khalistan. Some CMP testimony claimed he was a mole who left the plot just days before its execution because he was told to pull out, but the Canadian government denied that report. He later fled Canada and is believed to be in hiding in London, England. Hardial Singh Jewel and Manmohan Singh were both followers of Palmer and active in the Gurdwaras where he preached. On November 15, 2002, Jewel died of natural causes at 55. His phone number was left when ordering the airline tickets. He was seen at the airport the day the luggage was loaded, and he had allegedly stored the suitcases containing the bombs in the basement of a Vancouver school, but was never charged in the case. Daljit Sandhu was later named by a Crown witness as the man who picked up the tickets. During the trial, the Crown played a video from January 1989 in which Sandhu congratulated the families of Indira Gandhi's assassins and stated that she deserved that and he invited it and that's why she got it. Sandhu was cleared by Judge Ian Josephson in a March 16 judgment. Lakhbir Singh Brarode was the leader of the Sikh separatist organisation International Sikh Youth Federation. In September 2007, the Commission investigated reports, initially disclosed in the Indian investigative news magazine Tehelka, that Palmer had allegedly confessed and named the hitherto unnamed Lakhbir Singh Brarode as the mastermind behind the explosions. This claim appears to be inconsistent with other evidence known to the RCMP. On August 17, 1985, Inderjit Singh Reiat became a third suspect once the receipt for the tuna was found with his name. November 6, 1985. The RCMP raided the homes of suspected Sikh separatists Talwinder Singh Palmer, Inderjit Singh Reiat, Sajjan Singh Gill, Hardial Singh Jewel, and Manmohan Singh. In a 4.5-hour interview, Reiat denied all knowledge of the test blast or even Palmer. After he was told the CSIS had seen both of them, he changed his story that Palmer really wanted to build a device powerful enough so that he could take the device back to India to destroy a bridge. He explained that the gunpowder in the test was a failure as the device fizzled. The search of Reiat's house produced a carton with an unusual green tape also found in the Narita blast, a can of liquid fire brand starting fluid matching fragments found at the blast site, along with blasting caps and dynamite, including a pound of dynamite in a bag taken out its original tube casing, though none was consistent with blast residue. Reiat insisted only the clock, relays and tuna had been purchased for other than benign purposes. There was insufficient evidence to hold Palmer as charges are dropped days later. Bagri would later state before his later trial that he knew was probably a suspect by October 1985 but insisted he would have faced charges if there were any evidence he had anything to do with the bombing. It was established by November that it was a man with a Sikh name who probably checked the bag in Vancouver that caused the crash. Talwinder Singh Palmer was not seen in Canada sometime after late 1986, as authorities believed him to be living in Pakistan where he continued operations against India. Trials: authorities initially lacked evidence to link Reiat directly to either the Narita or Air India blasts and pursue a conspiracy to commit murder charge. Instead, Reiat pleaded guilty on April 29, 1986, to possession of an explosive substance and possession of an unregistered firearm. His sentence was a light $2,000 fine. Just 3 months later, Reiat moved his family from Canada to Coventry, near Birmingham, in the UK. Reiat was soon hired at a Jaguar factory where he worked for nearly 2 years. RCMP Mounties working with Prosecutor Jardine, RCMP and Japanese experts eventually determined the components of the bomb from fragments and matched them with items that Reiat possessed or had purchased. Prosecutor Jardine visited Tokyo 5 times to meet with Japanese authorities, and Canada formally asked that evidence to be sent to Canada. Still lacking sufficient evidence for a murder charge, Jardine recommended 2 manslaughter charges and 5 explosives-related counts, resulting in a request to Britain to extradite Reiat, who was arrested on February 5, 1988 as he was driving to the Jaguar car plant. After lengthy proceedings to extradite him from Britain, Reiat was flown to Vancouver, BC on December 13, 1989 and his trial began September 18, 1990. On May 10, 1991, he was convicted of 2 counts of manslaughter and 4 explosives charges relating to the Narita Airport bombing. He was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. 15 years after the bombing, on October 27, 2000, RCMP arrested Malik and Bagri. They were charged with 329 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of the people on board Air India Flight 182, conspiracy to commit murder, the attempted murder of passengers and crew on the Canadian Pacific flight at Japan's New Tokyo International Airport, and 2 counts of murder of the baggage handlers at New Tokyo International Airport. It became known as the Air India trial. On June 6, 2001, RCMP arrested Reiat on charges of murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy in the Air India bombing. On February 10, 2003, Reiat pleaded guilty to 1 count of manslaughter and a charge of aiding in the construction of a bomb. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was expected to provide testimony in the trial of Malik and Bagri, but prosecutors were vague. The trial of Malik and Bagri proceeded between April 2003 and December 2004 in Courtroom 20, more commonly known as the Air India Courtroom. At a cost of $7.2 million, the high-security courtroom was specially built for the trial in the Vancouver Law Courts. On March 16, 2005, Justice Ian Josephson found the 2 accused not guilty on all counts because the evidence was inadequate. I began by describing the horrific nature of these cruel acts of terrorism, acts which cry out for justice. Justice is not achieved, however, if persons are convicted on anything less than the requisite standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Despite what appear to have been the best and most earnest of efforts by the police and the Crown, the evidence has fallen markedly short of that standard. In a letter to the Attorney General of British Columbia, Malik has demanded compensation from the Canadian government for wrongful prosecution in his arrest and trial. Malik owes the government $6.4 million and Bagri owes $9.7 million in legal fees. Reiat's perjury trial. In February 2006, Inderjit Singh Reiat was charged with perjury with regard to his testimony in the trial. The indictment was filed in the Supreme Court of British Columbia and lists 27 instances where he allegedly misled the court during his testimony. Reiat had pleaded guilty to constructing the bomb, but denied under oath that he knew anything about the conspiracy. In the verdict, Justice Ian Josephson said, "I find him to be an unmitigated liar under oath." Even the most sympathetic of listeners could only conclude, as do I, that his evidence was patently and pathetically fabricated in an attempt to minimize his involvement in his crime to an extreme degree, while refusing to reveal relevant information he clearly possesses. On July 3, 2007, with perjury proceedings still pending, Reiat was denied parole by the National Parole Board, which concluded he was a continued risk to the public. The decision meant Reiat had to serve his full 5-year sentence, which ended February 9, 2008. Reiat's perjury trial began in March 2010 in Vancouver, but was abruptly dismissed on March 8, 2010. The jury was dismissed after biased remarks about Reiat by a woman juror. A new jury was chosen. In September 2010, according to the Lethbridge Herald newspaper, jurors were told Reiat had lied 19 times under oath. On September 19, 2010, Reiat was convicted of perjury. On January 7, 2011, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. In February 2011, Reiat filed an appeal stating that the judge erred in law, misdirected the jury and failed to tell jurors there was no evidence to support portions of the Crown's closing address, and called it harsh and excessive, asking for a new trial. In January 2013, the Supreme Court of Canada rejected his bid to appeal his perjury conviction. The country's top court did not disclose its reasons as per customary practice. In March 2014, the BC Court of Appeal dismissed Reiatsu's appeal that the 9-year length of the sentence, the country's longest sentence for perjury, was unfit. The court ruled the gravity of the perjury in such a case was without comparison. Mistakes and missed opportunities. Previous warning: the Canadian government had been warned by the Indian government about the possibility of terrorist bombs aboard Air India flights in Canada, and over 2 weeks before the crash, CSIS reported to the RCMP that the potential threat to Air India as well as Indian missions in Canada was high. Destroyed evidence. In his verdict, Justice Josephson cited unacceptable negligence by CSIS when hundreds of wiretaps of the suspects were destroyed. Of the 210 wiretaps that were recorded during the months before and after the bombing, 156 were erased. These tapes continued to be erased even after the terrorists had become the primary suspects in the bombing. Because the original wiretap records were erased, they were inadmissible as evidence in court. CSIS claimed the wiretap recordings contain no relevant information, but an RCMP memo states that there is a strong likelihood that had CSIS retained the tapes between March and August 1985, that a successful prosecution of at least some of principals in both bombings could have been undertaken. Murdered witnesses. Tara Singh Heer, the publisher of the Indo-Canadian Times and a member of the Order of British Columbia, provided an affidavit to the RCMP in 1995 claiming that he was present during a conversation in which Bagri admitted his involvement in the bombings. While at the London offices of fellow Sikh newspaper publisher Tarsem Singh Purul, Heer claimed he overheard a meeting between Purul and Bagri in which Bagri stated that if everything had gone as planned the plane would have blown up at Heathrow Airport with no passengers on it. But because the plane was a half hour to 3/4 of an hour late, it blew up over the ocean. On January 24 that same year, Purul was killed near the offices of the Despards newspaper in Southall, England, leaving Heer as the only other witness. On November 18, 1998, Heer was shot dead while getting out of his car in the garage of his home in Surrey. Heer had survived an earlier attempt on his life in 1988, but was paralyzed and used a wheelchair. As a consequence of his murder, the affidavit was inadmissible as evidence. Csis Connection. During an interview with Bagri on October 28, 2000, RCMP agents described Sajan Singh Gill as an agent for CSIS, saying the reason that he resigned from the Babar Khalsa was because his CSIS handlers told him to pull out. After the subsequent failure of CSIS to stop the bombing of Flight 182, the head of CSIS was replaced by Reid Morden. In an interview for CBC Television's news program The National, Morden claims that CSIS dropped the ball in its handling of the case. A Security Intelligence Review Committee cleared CSIS of any wrongdoing. However, that report remains secret to this day. The Canadian government continues to insist that there was no mole involved. Public inquiry. On May 1, 2006, the Crown in Council, on the advice of Prime Minister Stephen Harper, announced the launch of a full public inquiry into the bombing, headed by retired Supreme Court Justice John Major, to find answers to several key questions about the worst mass murder in Canadian history. Initiated later in June, the Commission of Inquiry into the investigation of the bombing of Air India Flight 182 was to examine how Canadian law restricted funding terrorist groups, how well witness protection is provided in terrorist cases, if Canada needed to upgrade its aviation security, and if issues of cooperation between the RCMP, CSIS, and other law enforcement agencies had been resolved. It was to also provide a forum wherein families of the victims could testify on the impact of the bombing and would not repeat any criminal trials. The inquiry's investigations were completed and released on June 17, 2010. The Commission expressed the view in their dossier that Tawinder Singh Parmar was the leader of the Babar Khalsa, a pro-Khalistan organization at the heart of radical extremism, and it is now believed that he was the leader of the conspiracy to bomb Air India flights. Major concluded that a cascading series of errors by Crown Ministries, the RCMP, and CSIS allowed the terrorist attack to take place. After the release of the findings, Stephen Harper announced in the media, on the 25th anniversary of the disaster, that he would acknowledge the catastrophic failures of intelligence, policing and air security that led to the bombing, and the prosecutorial lapses that followed, and deliver an apology on behalf of the sitting cabinet. Legacy, a Canadian tragedy. 20 years after the downing of Air India Flight 182, families gathered in Lancaster, Ireland to grieve. Governor-General Adrienne Clarkson, on the advice of Prime Minister Paul Martin, declared the anniversary a national day of mourning. During the anniversary observances, Martin said that the bombing was a Canadian problem, not a foreign problem, saying, "Make no mistake, the flight may have been Air India's, it may have taken place off the coast of Ireland, but this is a Canadian tragedy." In May 2007, Angus Reid Strategies released the results of public opinion polling of whether Canadians viewed the Air India bombing as a Canadian or Indian tragedy and who they blamed. 48% of respondents considered the bombing as a Canadian event, while 22% thought it was a mostly Indian affair. 34% of those asked felt both CSIS and airport security personnel deserved a great deal of the blame, in addition to 27% who believed the RCMP were largely to blame. 18% mentioned Transport Canada. Ken McQueen and John Geddes of Maclean said that the Air India bombing has been referred to as Canada's 9/11. They disagreed, however, stating, "In truth, it was never close to that." The date, June 23, 1985, is not seared into the nation's soul. The events of that day snuffed out hundreds of innocent lives and altered the destinies of thousands more, but it neither shook the foundations of government, nor transformed its policies. It was not, in the main, even officially acknowledged as an act of terrorism. Memorials were erected in Canada and elsewhere to commemorate the victims. In 1986, a monument was unveiled in Lancaster, West Cork, Ireland, on the first anniversary of the bombing. Subsequently, a groundbreaking occurred on August 11, 2006 at a playground that would form part of a memorial in Stanley Park, Vancouver, British Columbia. Another memorial was unveiled on June 22, 2007 in Humber Bay Park East, Toronto, Ontario. Many of the bombing victims had lived in Toronto. The memorial features a sundial, the base of which consists of stones from all provinces and territories of Canada, as well as the countries of the other victims, and a wall, oriented toward Ireland and bearing the names of the dead. A fourth memorial was unveiled in Lachine, Montreal on the 26th anniversary of the tragedy. There are no memorials in India as of yet. Recognition in media, documentaries about the bombing were made for Canadian television audiences. CBC Television announced the start of filming for Flight 182, a documentary about the tragedy directed by Sturla Gunnarsson. Its title was changed to Air India 182 before premiering at the Hot Docs Canadian International Documentary Festival in Toronto in April 2008. It subsequently premiered on CBC Television in June. Mayday, a TV show that covers aviation accidents and incidents, also documented the bombing on its episode Explosive Evidence. Many journalists have commented on the bombing throughout the decades since it occurred. 8 months after the bombing, the province newspaper reporter Salam Jiwa published Death of Air India Flight 182. Loss of Faith, How the Air India Bombers Got Away with Murder was published by Vancouver Sun reporter Kim Bolan in May 2005. Jiwa and fellow reporter Don Hawker published Margin of Terror, a reporter's 20-year odyssey covering the tragedies of the Air India bombing in May 2007. In her short story, The Management of Grief, Indian-born American writer Bharati Mukherjee uses fiction to explore the enduring grief of relatives of Air India 182 victims. The Management of Grief was originally published in the fiction collection The Middleman and Other Stories. Mukherjee also co-authored The Sorrow and the Terror, The Haunting Legacy of the Air India Tragedy with her husband, Clark Blaze. Inspired by mainstream Canada's cultural denial of the Air India tragedy, Neil Basundath wrote The Soul of All Great Designs. Canadian poet Rena copywriter Sarojin Isaac Lecoq created a collection of memorial and response poems, Children of Air India, unauthorized exhibits and interjections. Other recognition: the Padma Memorial Awards at Laurentian University were established in honor of Vishnu Pada, the husband of Lata Pada. Timeline of events: for a summarized timeline, see Timeline of the Air India Flight 182 affair. Maps, see also. List of accidents and incidents on commercial airliners, terrorism in Canada, Timeline of airliner bombing attacks, Air India Flight 112 alleged bombing plot, Indian Airlines Flight 814, UTA Flight 772, Sikhism in Canada, Yelavathi Naya Udama, Pan Am Flight 103, Lata Pada, Asia Majara, Operation Blue Star, 1984 Anti-Sikh riots. References: Honourable Mr. Justice B. N. Kirpal. Indian Government Report of the Court investigating the accident of Air India Boeing 747 aircraft VT-EFO, Kanishka on June 23, 1985. February 26, 1986. External links: 2010 Final Report Air India Commissioner Government of Canada, The Verdict Reasons for Judgment, R.V. Malik and Bagri, Background on Air India Bombing CBC Car, Aftermath of Air India www.canada.com Air India Archives, CBC Digital Archives The Air India Investigation, Criminal Occurrence Description at the Aviation Safety Network, R.J. Waldron and Company's Air India Investigation Aviation Accident Investigators, Passenger Lists, Final Passenger and Crew List, does not indicate locations or distinguish crew from passengers, passengers and crew aboard Air India jetliner. Associated Press at The New York Times. June 24, 1985, preliminary list with crew members indicated and locations of U.S. passengers indicated, alternate version.